On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk Google is in the hot seat with the EU again. iOS 12 is trying to bridge the gap in security for all sectors of the market. Plus, Padre Curtis and I talk with Brian McHenry from F5 Networks around Web Application Firewalls. It's Wyatt on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twit. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 294, recorded June 8th, 2018. Web Application Firewalls. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Home plays a big role in your life. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. It lets you apply simply and understand the entire mortgage process fully so you can be confident that you're getting the right mortgage for you. Get started at rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. And by Eero. Never think about Wi-Fi again with Eero's hyper-fast, super simple Wi-Fi system. And now the second generation Eero is tri-band and twice as fast. For free overnight shipping to the US or Canada, visit Eero.com, select overnight shipping at checkout, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. Welcome to This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that's dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host for today, Louis Maresca, your guide through the world of enterprise. But of course, I don't want to guide you by myself. I need a little help from my friends, starting with Mr. Robert Balser, Padre SJ. How are you doing, my friend? Are you still traveling around the world, or you're stationary for a while?
I am stationary for the next week. This is my last week at Twit, so we're doing that mad dash of putting everything in the boxes and hopefully labeling them so that we can figure out where things went. Good times, man.
Well,
Good times.
Good times. Of course, I need my daily dose of Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. I can't have enough. You recently were over at RSA conference, right?
Well, RSA in San Francisco was earlier this year. This week, I was at SAP Sapphire Now conference here in Orlando. And next week, I'll be at Cisco Live, which is also here in Orlando. So it's wonderful being able to travel around to all of the big conferences without ever having to leave the comfort of home.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can't keep track of them all. There's just too many of them going on. Well, guys, thanks for being here. I couldn't definitely don't want to do the show without you. So, but we do have another great show for everybody today. We're talking a little bit about iOS and Apple and how they're trying to revive security in hopes that the enterprise notices. And of course, we also have a great guest from F5 Networks to talk about web application firewalls. But of course, it wouldn't be Twit and it wouldn't be complete without first starting with the blips. So for those gadget enthusiasts out there, they were waiting for cheap Surface Book-like device, but coming from Chrome OS, well, wait no further. The HP Chromebook X2 is finally here. June 10th is the date you can get it. But back in April, HP announced the X2, and now we know it's coming with a metal alloy body. Makes a bit of heavier than that Pixel that you might have, but it comes with 4 to 8 gigs of RAM, has the newer 7th generation Kaby Lake M3 processor, and it comes with a stylus, of course, the HP Active Pen. 12.3-inch screen with a resolution of 2400 by 1600. It's sharp, it's vibrant, and it maintains great viewing angles. Equally important, though, it has a 400-nit brightness with Owens Corning Gorilla Glass 4 for the touch display. Plus, it has a camera on the front and on the back. Sound familiar? 5-megapixel front, 13-megapixel back, USB-C ports, and a micro SD slot. Of course, a microphone and a headphone jack. And here's what's cool. You reach down at the bottom, and you pop off those magnetic clips, and bam, the screen pops off to be a nice solid but lightweight tablet. You can write right on the tablet. Your hand won't actually interfere if you're using the stylus. And the design and mechanics really kind of remind me of that powerful Surface Book 2, but this one has Chrome OS on it as well. And plus, what's so big about it is the price, $599. With Chrome OS being more prominent in education, especially K through 12 grades, and the enterprise is starting to move in on these devices due to their simplicity, it seems this device is the next step to closing the gap. I have a feeling Apple might be next to the touchscreen notebook market because soon these devices will dominate.
So a misconfiguration error in Google Groups is leaving some companies' data way too public. Businesses using G Suite have access to Google Groups, a service integrated with corporate mailing lists that provides teams with discussion groups. But a widespread Google Groups misconfiguration is causing businesses to leak corporate data. More than 9,600 institutions, including hospitals, universities, media companies, government agencies, and Fortune 500 organizations, have public Google Groups settings. Of these, researchers have found that 3,000 are currently leaking some form of sensitive email. Now, Google Groups are private by default, and settings can be adjusted on a domain and per group basis. Many businesses have groups visibility configured to public on the internet. As a result, Google Groups can leak emails that should be private, but actually are searchable on Google. So unless your team requires some groups to be accessed by external users, researchers recommend going in, checking, and switching your domain-level Google Group settings back to private.
Every year, data centers in the United States use a combined 100 billion kilowatt hours of power, or about 2% of our total energy use. Of that 100 billion, roughly half gets used to remove the heat generated by the modern data center. Now, in recent years, big data companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple have experimented with the concept of building data centers where it's cool to reduce the power required for cooling. But now Microsoft aims to take the data center underwater. They're testing phase 2 of Project Natick. It's a shipping-sized container pod that's designed to be submerged for up to 5 years at a time. Now, inside the nitrogen-filled 1-atmosphere pressurized pod are 864 Microsoft data center servers with FPGA acceleration and 27.6 petabytes of storage. Project Natick requires a fiber trunk connected to land and 240 kilowatts of power supplied by wind, solar, and tide power generation. Microsoft's justification for the project is several-fold. First, the ocean can provide virtually free cooling. Second, the pods can go from request to deployment in just 90 days. Third, as half of the Earth's population lives within 200 kilometers of an ocean, Natick pods can be dropped anywhere and where needed, reducing round-trip latency to 2 milliseconds or less. And with phase 1 of the Project Natick already having tackled issues like connectivity, corrosion, and security, it'll be interesting to see if these submarine data centers will catch on.
So Google is about to be hit with a fine that's not something they can actually ignore. It's projected Google will get a bill from the EU for higher than $2.8 billion, and that's B for billion. Not a drop in the bucket for really any corporation. Even though this is an ongoing case since 2016, the fine seems to be relative to what's going on with how the EU's goal to try to bring the power back to consumers rather than manufacturers and service providers. Brussels charged Google with uncompetitive behavior relating to Android. According to the European Competition Commission, Google has a requirement that smartphone manufacturers pre-install Google Search and Chrome in order to access the Play Store. They claim this gives the company an advantage and hampers users' choice. Google denies any wrongdoing, but they seem to forget the whole issue with the EU and over-packaging Microsoft Internet Explorer with Windows back in the day. Android powers more than 3/4 of all smartphones in the EU, so this is a direct hit on the company and not just a warning shot. If you think about it, Apple does this as well with Safari, and so does Linux distros like Ubuntu. Is it their time coming soon? Look out, because the EU Competition Commission is coming for you.
Well, there's a new federal report out on how to beat the botnets. In May 2017, the Republican administration issued Executive Order 13800, strengthening the cybersecurity of federal networks and critical infrastructure. Earlier this week, one response to that order was made public as the Secretaries of Commerce and Homeland Security jointly released a report to the president on enhancing the resilience of the internet and communications ecosystem against botnets and other automated distributed threats. Now, this report is based on 5 goals for improving security, and broadly, these 5 are: 1, identify a clear pathway toward an adaptable, sustainable, and security technology marketplace; 2, promote innovation in the infrastructure for dynamic adaptation to evolving threats; 3, promote innovation at the edge of the network to prevent, detect, and mitigate automated distributed attacks; 4, promote and support coalitions between security, infrastructure, and operational technology communities domestically and around the world. And Goal 5, increase awareness and education across the ecosystem. Now, these goals are entirely worthwhile, but the real question is whether either the government or industry will pay any attention to the contents of the report. We've been seeing reports like this for more than a decade now, and, well, we're still seeing reports like this one.
According to U.S. Navy officials, a Chinese state-sponsored hacking group infiltrated the network of a defense contractor and made off with 614 gigabytes of data related to Project Sea Dragon and a host of other highly sensitive data troves. First reported by the Washington Post, the officials quoted confirmed that the breaches ran from January through February of 2018 and involved a contractor who worked for the Naval Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island, though they declined to name the contractor. The Chinese hackers stole the data. That the Chinese hackers stole the data isn't earth-shattering, given that they previously hacked contractors and exfiltrated data on the United States stealth and strategic weapon systems. But as details emerge about this hack, there is plenty of head-shaking wonderment. For example, the data exfiltrated was stored on the contractor's unclassified network, despite being classified highly sensitive. And the data included performance information for signal and sensor, electronic warfare, and cryptographic systems that shouldn't have been anywhere on the contractor's network. More troubling is the fact that the information taken could directly affect the operational security of U.S. military units currently shadowing Chinese forces in the disputed waters off the Philippines. When will there finally be real consequences for contractors who expose our most sensitive and costly secrets?
So remember the fear you felt when you were informed your account was hacked and hackers had personal information about you? It felt bad. You felt betrayed. You had to change your passwords, cancel credit cards, call banks, and turn on two-factor. Well, what if you were told that your DNA was stolen? How would you react? How would you feel? Well, this week, the DNA testing service MyHeritage revealed that hackers took 92 million of their accounts. Do you feel fear? Well, hold on. Luckily, they only stole usernames, emails, and passwords, and they never reached the actual genetic data. But this brings up some good questions. What if hackers did steal the DNA data? What could they have done with it? Well, maybe they could use it for ransom back to the owner or family, even though the people don't actually know what people can do with DNA. It's still kind of darn scary. That is more lucrative than you think, though. It could be sold to insurance agencies and separate markets to inform them of your, well, faults. Kind of reminds me of that Gattaca movie, if you remember. The law enforcement also needs or wants this data, too, because instead of just criminals in a database, they can cross-reference 92 million people to see if any relatives are in there as well. Some sites let you actually download a copy of your entire genetic code. This means that username and password could have been more useful than just getting data like that. I have a feeling that this is just the beginning of these types of attacks, so it might be time to add some robust protections when it comes to genetic data privacy. Penalizing companies like this, threatening their demise, might just strike fear into them to ensure better security and protection for consumers. Well, folks, that does it for the bites. I'm sorry for the blips. Next up, the bites. But first, we want to thank a sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Rocket Mortgage. So Quicken Loans is the largest mortgage lender. J.D. Power even rated Quicken Loans the highest in customer satisfaction this past year and ranked the highest in mortgage origination satisfaction for the last 8 years. They are not complacent, of course. They want to make it easier for consumers and to actually finance things. That's where Rocket Mortgage was created. It's solving a real-world problem for buyers and sellers. They realize it isn't easy to do refis or get a new loan. The process is way behind the times. And for me, it actually took a pound of papers and hours of my time searching through boxes to find data, providing salary information and income, time I will never get back. So I was assigned some random rep. I had to do searching file cabinets and safe deposit boxes. And by the way, I couldn't even email them. I had to fax to them. It's really stressful if you think about it. That's why Quicken Loans created Rocket Mortgage. They make it super simple. They reinvented the entire process so you don't have to waste your time. You don't stress about it. It allows you to buy the house of your dreams without kind of all that red tape. You don't have to go to the bank. You can do it right on your device that has a browser from anywhere. All you have to do is go to rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. You spend a couple minutes of your time. They barely ask you any questions. They basically ask you things you already know, like you don't have to search for anything, such as your name and your address, your loan type, the property you're going for, the purchase price. That's it. Because Quicken Loans has partners with all the financial institutions, they do all the rest for you. They get all the information they need to find the loan. You choose the rate and the term, and they show you the loans that you're qualified for, all in just minutes. Nowadays, the housing market is crazy up here, especially in the Seattle area. And I've actually been to open houses where people actually give their own offers right there. Well, now you can actually take control and do the same. All you have to do is jump on your phone right there at the open house, go to rocketmortgage.com/enterprise, and in a couple minutes, you can show the seller's realtor you're serious about buying that property too. It's Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Apply simply, understand fully, mortgage confidently. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. That's rocketmortgage.com/enterprise. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLS consumeraccess.org, number 3030. We thank Rocket Mortgage for making This Week in Enterprise Tech possible. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the bites. So this past week was WWDC, and of course, several of my colleagues actually were over there and checking out what's going on in the Apple ecosystem. And of course, one of the major releases announced was iOS 12. And of course, there was a bunch of performance increases here. iOS 12 was, of course, showing that the fact that people were pretty upset about the performance in iOS 11. And so they wanted to increase the performance of 12 quite a bit. But there was also a ton of security improvements as well. So one of the biggest ones here, I want to start with the obvious, is the fact that iOS 12 will actually be available for all the same devices that iOS 11 supports. So this means that all the security improvements that you get over the years in the new OS will span a larger set of devices that weren't actually supported before, including the next generation ones. So Apple tends to kind of leave devices in the dust. So this is more compelling and appealing for people who actually don't want to upgrade right away. And of course, we also want to go through a lot of the other features, but I do want to bring in the co-hosts here to get their thought. We're going to go through each one and maybe talk about how this applies to enterprise and security. So I want to start with Curtis first. So just going back just to the easy one, the out of the box one here of, hey, now iOS 12 is available to all the older devices that are compatible with iOS 11, as well as all the new devices. Does this actually increase the surface area so that we can bring those security updates and all of the connectivity improvements back to the older devices so people can feel more comfortable?
I think it does. And it's also one of the things that keeps iOS being a more attractive enterprise platform than Android in a lot of cases. One of the issues with Android, people always say, well, Android has a broader footprint than iOS, and that's true. But no single version of Android has the footprint of iOS. There are, at last report, something like 73,000 different variations of Android, each with their own minor issues. With iOS now having a much broader footprint, going back a couple of generations on devices, both the tablets and the phones, it's going to make a lot of enterprise IT folks much more comfortable about keeping things on iOS, making sure their applications run on iOS, using the MDM for iOS. So I think this is a very savvy move on Apple's part to make iOS more enterprise friendly, while at the same time still not making any open pleas to the enterprise. It's actually pretty well done on that part.
Right. So I think I'll throw this over to you, Padre, as well, because I think that this kind of helps. If you think about it, you're kind of increasing the set of devices that are available now to your organization. And, if you're providing your devices like to sales organizations or so on, now you don't have to really worry about, paying the extra dollar for the really expensive newer devices. And you can be guaranteed that kind of surface area of security is taken care of. Do you think that this is something that's going to kind of drive forth the selling of more iPhones, or is this going to be just another gimmick that they're trying to do, basically?
It could do a little bit of both. One of the things to remember here is it sounds on paper like a great idea that iOS 12 is going to make older devices faster. And basically, there's a lot of technical ways that they've done that, but the main way is they've stopped the what they've done with newer versions of iOS, and that is it deals with what's on screen while also prefetching what it's going to deal with next. So in iOS 12, it separates those. It takes care of what's on the screen first, and then it moves on to the prefetch, which doesn't actually make the phone faster. In terms of overall usage of an application, it just makes it feel faster. But that's not a put down. That's actually important. So they've recognized that. They've recognized that they can make older devices feel faster, And for most people, that's enough, even if it isn't actually taking less time. Now, as you mentioned, this could mean that I can now take my old iPad, my old iPhone, and I can use some of the Enterprise-y, and I use that word Enterprise-y because they're not really enterprise features, to bring them into my network and maybe do interesting things with them. But I honestly don't see that as being a huge factor for the iOS crowd. The iOS crowd is already going to get the latest device. They're not really going to be affected by these updates. Most of the security enhancements sound nice, but we've already seen Apple bend over backwards to help governments who want to access that data. So the net result is iOS 12 slightly faster, slightly more secure, but I still don't think it's an enterprise device.
Right. It's interesting. You talked about performance, and PC Guy 8088 actually mentioned it. Does this mean that maybe they're actually having to test and tweak the performance of the newer operating system on some of the older devices? Because usually when you put a new OS on an older device, you tend to not have that performance that you're going to get from the newer hardware. So this is interesting. They're actually opening their surface area to being more costly when it comes to testing when shipping the new OS as well. But we also want to talk a little bit about the security improvements they got here. So because there's actually quite a bit. Starting with SMS passcode. So this is interesting because when you go to do sometimes a kind of a two-factor auth kind of thing where you go to a site and they say, hey, go check your SMS for a passcode, enter it, like my bank does this. And so it's kind of a tough because then you have to go to you have to go over to your message and you have to look at the code and either have to write it down or try to copy it. And sometimes you can't paste it and it becomes kind of a pain in the neck. This ability kind of lets you autofill. Just get that passcode in your SMS. They'll let you take that passcode and actually autofill in any type of field that lets you kind of enter it in there. Is this like, to me, they call it more secure, definitely a enterprise type thing for things that are doing two-factor. I mean, Curtis, is this just something that's going to like blow people out of the water, or is it just a convenience thing?
I think it's more of a convenience. I mean, it's something that you could do by taking a number of steps. This just makes it more of a convenience. And I think what it does is, in many ways, it's another step in shoving hardware tokens off into the dustbin of history, because this makes it so much easier to use something that you've already got with you, your smartphone, as a hardware token for two-factor authentication. I think that the good news is that we're likely to see two-factor authentication become even more prevalent in the enterprise. That's all to the good. I just wouldn't buy stock in a company that makes hardware tokens right now.
Right. Another interesting one is the password autofill feature. So this is kind of related, so the Apple's actually opening up access to their QuickType or password autofill, and essentially this will allow third-party password managers, and they can then access it using their API. So this is interesting because now you can essentially enable kind of autofill for any password coming from anywhere, meaning whether it's a third-party password manager or not. Padre, is this something you think that's going to be big, especially things like authenticators and some, 1Pass and that kind of thing?
No. And for the simple reason is it's existed. It's existed quite well already on the Android space. Some of us use it a lot. I use Google Authenticator. And in fact, my multi-factor authentication includes a call out to my phone that says, hey, you've just signed in. Would you like to allow this? And I can say yes or no. And that's all encrypted. That's all protected. So that's existed. Some people are using it. The people who are using it will already be using the tools, and they're not going to switch over to this. The people who are not using will have no idea what it is. They'll have no idea why they would want to enable it, and therefore it's kind of a moot point. And again, that's why if you look at the rundown of iOS 12 advancements, most of them are really on the consumer side. And there's been some interesting stuff on the consumer side, but the enterprise and the back end side, it's not exciting. There's nothing there that makes me say, okay, this is now my enterprise device. Definitely not more so than an up-to-date Android device that I might already have.
Right. So what about so there's this other feature. Let's get to this one. This what they call USB restricted mode. So this This seems to be a direct hit across the bow of some of the government agencies out there because they're using this tool called Grayshift's Gray Key, which allows them to essentially kind of crack into the device by plugging into the USB and then running through, password options and so on and so forth. So this type of tool, actually, if you're connecting your device to USB, it actually will lock and prevent data access over the USB based off of whether you have a timeout or whatnot. Now, of course, previous versions of iOS actually let the data connection over USB to actually unlock the phone. So this is where I think they're saying, you know what, we're going to close that gap. We're going to stop that particular vulnerability from happening, and that tool is going to be rendered useless. So that's $30,000 that you're already paying for. That's going to go down the toilet, hopefully, with iOS. Curtis, is this something that we can say? I think this is something that just helps an enterprise maybe feel a little bit more comfortable saying, okay, then these devices are a little bit more secure. Now they're a little hardened. And of course, I think I feel more comfortable by kind of bringing it into my organization.
Yeah, and I think what this does is just add some additional security to a device that has already been reasonably well adopted by large enterprises. I mean, if at a show like SAP Sapphire this week, it is astounding just how many iPad Pros were there, how many applications were shown using iPads, how many SAP applications use iPhone and iPad. So I think what this does is just make it a little easier for companies to embrace the iOS devices, add some security, and especially this should make it just a little bit easier to breathe about GDPR compliance. I mean, GDPR is having an impact that is bigger than many of us really think about on a regular basis. But when you talk to international business folks, it is a huge, huge deal. And everything that we see here in this new release of iOS will play very nicely with GDPR compliance audits.
Right. So I think there's, of course, a couple other here. We'll get through them really quick here. So there's, because Facebook ID registration. So now I'm sorry, not Facebook, Face ID registration. We got Facebook on the brain. Face ID registration. They allow you now to register another person for Face ID. So this way, I guess if you lose your phone or, have a family member. The other interesting thing is, starting to encrypt things. So like one of the examples is FaceTime now has encryption across the wire. It has encryption that allows you to supply security policies to that. So again, Padre, you kind of called this out already. You said, hey, none of these things are really that compelling. They're like, but are we starting now after we've kind of gone through a couple of them? Are they starting to add up? Are they trying to send a message? Are they saying we're getting there? Like, what is Apple trying to do here? Like, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure just by picking out some of these things from the wild here.
Yeah, I'm a little puzzled too, because you'll remember with iOS 9, let's go back to iOS 9. When it released, there was a lot of kerfuffle made over the fact that it was enterprise friendlier, including things like policy and integration with Active Directory. And there hasn't been a whole lot since. I think Apple's actually okay with where iOS is. They don't need to make it an enterprise tool. And so the performance enhancements, like, for example, closing off the USB hole, which I think we can all agree was puzzling that it existed for as long as it did. It's sort of a nod to a few things that are happening on the security side, a few things that are happening on the enterprise side. But they don't need to pander to the enterprise. They just don't. They know that's not their area. The only time they get enterprise is when they have an executive bringing in a device under BYOD policy. So, what is Apple trying to do here? They're just trying to make people happy enough in saying, yeah, it's not the worst. It's not horrible. It's actually pretty good with security. It's actually pretty good with policy, but we're still selling this primarily as a consumer device.
Right. All right, I think we talked about enough about that. I think let's move on to the next bite, because I think this is a little bit more kind of closer to home. It helps kind of people kind of bridge the gap to some of the knowledge gap that we have here. So if you haven't heard about Stanford AI for All program, then you should go check it out, aiforall.stanford.edu. It's an education program for high school students designed to introduce them to artificial intelligence and to spark those interests in the AI, and of course, making sure that they introduce them to role models in the AI world. Students will basically get hands-on experience with robotics projects alongside peers and AI grad students alike. They also use AI demos and learn about different career paths in the AI world. So there was actually a great story here about a girl by the name of Stephanie Tena, and she's a 16-year-old programmer who was actually searching the internet for coding programs and found the organization AI for All. And after she applied, she actually got a full scholarship here. And of course, I'm not sure you heard, but artificial intelligence is a major driver and in what we call the fourth industrial revolution here. And if you think about all the major tech companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft alike, are realigning around this thing. So I guess we're saying this is time to kind of bring this to the masses. It's essentially time to educate people on what AI is and showing them the advantages. But the fact here is, in the world of increasingly driven by the fact that everything's algorithms, people like Stephanie, it's kind of daunting to them to kind of come to this industry and understand what AI really is. Now, there's all those other things, kind of lower level things here. Like, for instance, there's coding camps, like Carly Kloss's has coding camps for gals who basically 2-week free class that allows you to go and apply some of your knowledge and learn some new things. It's free. You can learn with Swift and Ruby and JavaScript and all these things. But again, it's not AI. So this is interesting. I think, I want to throw it over to you first, Project. I think, are we saying that what they're trying to do is trying to bring AI to the masses? But AI and machine learning, these things are very complex things. I mean, they're not, maybe you can be, you can essentially learn the top level components. You can be an enthusiast here, but trying to bring these things to the youngsters, is this something that we should be doing now? I mean, is it a way to get things to the masses and maybe advance technology sooner?
Yeah, so I can answer this by describing Maker Faire here in the Bay Area. We just had it 2 weeks ago, and Google actually had a tent there that was nothing but AI. And they were showing off AI products, and they were showing off AI projects that people could do with existing modules. Now, when we say AI, we're thinking of ultra-advanced machine learning, deep neural learning, but that's not necessarily how you teach it. They're teaching it like the old code modules. So this is the module that will decide X. This is the module that will decide Y. We can combine them and get Z. That's the kind of teaching that we're going to be doing with AI. Not necessarily teaching them how the AI is created, but teaching them how to combine different AI modules to take input and turn it into desired output. Now, that's fine. I love that, even if it's not AI. It could just be standard coding because it teaches people the logical progression of problem solving. Now, what this will do is when you find those students who show great aptitude in combining the modules, maybe you start showing them, okay, well, here's the code under the hood of those modules. Can you help improve it? So what I see this is not as, okay, now we're indoctrinating all of our kids with AI learning. We're just showing them how it works, and perhaps we're giving them a leg up on using it in a future application. And then if they're good enough, maybe they're the ones who will write the code blocks for the next generation. So I like it. I think it's good. It's not a cure-all. It doesn't mean that we will have a great AI advancement, but it does mean that people can start to demystify what AI actually means.
Right. And I do agree. I think AI is definitely going to make an impact on society. So I think there's a key here, though, is it seems like it's targeted at young women, young professional women. I think the interesting thing is this maybe a way to kind of bridge the gender gap here, bring the latest and greatest technology that the market's asking for to actually help bridge the gender gap. I'm going to throw it over to you, Curtis. Is this something that will help? Is this something that will hopefully bring interesting things to allow more diversity in the workplace and, again, bring the latest technology to that group?
Well, first of all, I think it's wonderful anytime we can bring a group that is underrepresented in technology into the field, because I think that we have seen in study after study that the solutions that we generate are better. in objective, measurable ways if the team putting them together is more diverse. Just having the collection of thought from different experiences tends to lead to better results. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I also think it's great that we are bringing more young women into the technology field. You know, it's interesting. We've got this effort. Girl Scouts are doing a great deal around programming and technology. I think, you know, you have a wave of different programs that are designed to do precisely this, and I think it's a very, very good thing. I'm with Padre. I think that the real benefit to this is not necessarily that it might help us make a very rapid, major leap in artificial intelligence, but that we're much more likely to see creative uses of artificial intelligence techniques. And beyond that, much more creative applications of programming and coding and technology because of the greater diversity of people who are putting their hands on it. And I see nothing but good resulting from all of that.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, I think we definitely want to move on because we want to get to our guest. And so I think that does it for the bites. But of course, next up is our guest. And we're talking F5 networks. So we're talking a little bit about firewalls. But before we get there, we want to thank another sponsor in This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Eero. So Wi-Fi, come on, you've been to a place where Wi-Fi is not so great. You're maybe at your home where the Wi-Fi signal isn't great. And of course, maybe you have a great signal or the Wi-Fi is sluggish. Well, in my home, I had enterprise grade access points and routers. And because of the shape of my house, I had dead zones all over the place. Sometimes my devices would actually switch to cellular and I had no idea. You know, I even had some devices outside my house, like security devices, and they had spotty coverage, which is not good if you think about it. Well, in steps Eero. It uses mesh technology to bounce between my different Eero devices so I can ensure the signal stays strong and that speed stays fast. All I did was plug in an Eero all the way in the front of the house, by the front door, one in the hall, one in the kitchen, and then by the bedrooms, and another one in the media room, which was connected to my internet modem. It sounds like a lot, but it's actually just walking around the house, plugging them in the power outlets, and adding them to the mesh. To add them, all you have to do is pop open the Eero app on your phone. In my case, it was iOS, but it works on Android too. And you tell the app what you want to do. You want to start adding the devices, and it immediately finds your device using Bluetooth, and it runs some tests to ensure that it's in good spot. And then once the test is done, it tests your internet speed, and then bam, you're done. That's it. Everything's added. Everything's ready to go. Your network's ready to go. I went back and added more Eeros, but actually plugged in this super cool Eero beacon, which is actually a full-fledged access point, but it uses the 5 gigahertz radio. But it even has a night light that adjusts for the daytime and for the nighttime. I actually went back and added this Eero to my garage workshop because there was a bunch of dead spots out there, and I wanted to connect some of my IoT devices and some of those low-power devices that are out there. There's actually this new Thread radio, which is actually used for low-power devices like locks and doorbells and IoT devices alike, and other sensors, of course. And, of course, the cool thing about Eero is the technology. They use true mesh software. And the technology uses a dynamic routing algorithm to ensure connectivity and speed. And it's always perfect throughout the entire mesh network. Now, Eero has been around for a while, actually. They've used machine learning and data collected from hundreds of thousands of real environments to develop this thing. And it really kind of shows when you start to use it. The software is actually even fun to use. It constantly tests your internet connections. You can check it out. You can see what's the status of it throughout the day. And it tells you how you're doing. It also tells you how each node is happening and how the health of that node in your network, which is great. Plus, the security. It actually keeps you up to date all the time. It patches what you need when you need it. In this day and age, that's actually super important on any network if you think about it. No more dead spots. No more speed issues. If you have an outlet, you get internet. You can expand your network and have high-speed internet. No problem. No more Wi-Fi issues. Get one of these things right now. Head over to Eero.com and pick up one of their easy kits. Plus, for free overnight shipping to US or Canada, visit Eero.com and select that overnight shipping and then enter Enterprise to make it free. That's Eero.com. Enter the code Enterprise. Love Eero. And we thank Eero for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's that time of the show. We get to our guest to drop some knowledge on the Twiat Riot, and today's no exception. He's a senior manager of global customer solutions for F5 Networks, focusing on web applications and network security, and he's an expert in the field. We welcome today, this week in Enterprise Tech, Mr. Brian McHenry. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Lou. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. Of course, we love having you on because you tend to drop us some really good knowledge and bring some really good things to the field. And we have tons to talk about. I want to, again, rehash with our audience in case they missed the previous episodes. Can you tell a little bit about you, how you got into the field, and kind of your journey through tech and security?
Yeah, so I started out, worked my way up from desktop support through network admin, SOC type of roles. And then about 10 years ago, I joined F5 as a sales engineer, and then moved into solution architect role where I work more with our product management team. Now at Customer Solutions, we're sort of a field-oriented customer success program. What we like to do is go out and find out what our customers are doing that we didn't intend them to do. And I mean that in a good way. So there's what you design the product to do, and then there's what customers innovate and are able to figure out as a novel use case using the features in a interesting and novel way. So we like to find those use cases, gather them up, and then produce different types of documentation, whether it's videos or blog posts or other things to help kind of share the knowledge that is being generated by F5's many customers. So it's a pretty fun job, and my team gets to do a lot of cool stuff in the lab.
Fantastic. We love to share that knowledge, especially with our audience here. So fantastic. Thank you again for being here. So first, we have tons to talk about here, but I want a little bit about, there's tons of terms and things that kind of going around the internet. And of course, people talk about some of the benefits to these network security services and so on. But today we're going to talk about WAF, or Web Application Firewalls. Can you tell the audience a little about what it is and what it can do for my network? Absolutely.
So we've all heard about firewalls, and whether you're new to enterprise technology or you're a long-term veteran, firewall instantly conjures a picture in your mind of maybe an appliance, physical appliance in the network that is going to keep the bad guys out and potentially keep sensitive information from escaping. Now, one of the problems is that we've gotten really good at network level security, and that's where most firewalls are instrumented. They're good at blocking source and destination based on IP address and port and protocol. However, they have limited visibility at the application layer. So we're talking about like the actual data payload of the packet more than just the IP address information. And so with the prevalence of HTTP and web applications in general, there's become a demand to inspect that traffic more closely because the attackers have kind of abandoned network attacks to a great degree. And this was validated recently. We just did a report with F5 Labs, which is our threat intelligence arm. The folks at F5 Labs reviewed over 400 cases over the last decade of data breach. So all the publicly disclosed cases that have been over the last decade. And what they found was that 86% of the data breaches over the last decade that were publicly disclosed, 86%, it was an application layer breach of a web application. So that should tell you just how much, when data breaches at issue, how much the web application layer is really the focus of our adversaries. So attackers are targeting that increasingly. So whether it's large credit bureaus or some of the things that you mentioned, there's a genealogy website that you mentioned, and I thought that was an interesting anecdote from the blips because recently a serial killer, and not to kind of bring the tone down, but a serial killer in California called the Golden State Killer, he was active in the 70s and 80s, hasn't been active in a long time, so don't get scared. But they caught him based on doing a partial DNA match through one of these genealogy websites. And he wasn't the first one to get caught, but most recent, most high profile. And so when you think about sensitivity of data and how it can be, you can create value from it, that's a good way to create value from it. But when you're an attacker, you've got a lot of really bad ways to create value from the sensitivity of data. And can I gain access to your data or your systems and infrastructure? And so what we know from my personal experience, as well as the decade of data breaches report on F5labs.com, is that the application layer is heavily targeted, And most organizations don't have a more advanced firewall. They might have a next-gen firewall, that quote-unquote next-gen. That's application-aware, but it's application-aware across many protocols, including DNS, FTP, peer-to-peer, but they're really not looking at every single request all the way down to the full data payload of each request. That's where a web application firewall is different, and where a web application firewall can provide a lot of additional value.
Right. So it's interesting. We use our chat room from time to time, and Specs actually in the chat room, they basically said, hey, it's really hard. It's hard to write. Sometimes it's hard to write good code that you didn't misconfigure. And as a software developer, I know it's really hard to sometimes consider each and every type of exploit or vulnerability that when you're developing the code. That's why you have tools and tests and specialists to help out. But that tends to get quite expensive. So how do these application firewalls help you? Like what actually goes, like if you have an old legacy piece of software, how is it going to help me there?
So that's a great question coming from the chat room. And that's one of the reasons why web application firewalls, although they've been around for well over a decade now, are really starting to come to the fore. So whether it's a flaw in the application code itself, and humans are writing code, and we're trying to use more secure frameworks and use more secure coding practices. I just sat down for a couple of days with my friend Jim Manico, who's one of the leaders of the OWASP project and runs his own security firm doing training for more secure coding practices. And Jim and I shared this, this really good back and forth, because he's been kind of an anti-web app firewall guy, because he's really, fix the code, more secure code. But when we look at really the complexity of an application infrastructure, whether it's the code that might be insecure, it may actually just be the application server. You might have really good secure code, but the application server might have a new flaw. Zero-day CVE, Apache struts has been in the news a lot over the last couple of years, and because they just have a lot of flaws in this complex application framework. And what we find is, even if we know about these flaws, that there's a window of remediation time, right? So if we do an application vulnerability assessment and we find maybe we have a flaw in our application server, like Apache struts or IIS, or we have a flaw in our code, it's not as simple as fixing the code or fixing or applying a patch, because the ecosystem of the infrastructure is very sensitive. You fix one thing, you might break another, right? It's not as simple as closing an IP and a port on a traditional firewall. It's much more complex. And so when we don't want to maybe necessarily muck with the OS or the application server patch or the code itself right away, we got to do regression testing, make sure that our fix isn't going to break other things. That means that I have this window from 0 day of a CVE being announced all the way to when I actually get a remediation in place. And so when you take a web application firewall on the network, it provides a way to apply what we call a virtual patch. I can put a signature in place that will pick up an attempt to exploit this vulnerability that may exist on my backend systems. And so that's not the only thing a web app firewall can do, but it does provide me a way to quickly apply remediation on 0 day. And a good web application firewall should have a pretty robust signature set that will pick up stuff even on 0 day. So if the signature set is really well refined and polished, then even on 0 day, one of the signatures will probably trigger for an attempt to exploit. And we've seen that in the threat campaigns over the last couple of years. When a new 0 day comes out, we see these campaigns where they start right away as soon as the CVE is announced.
Right. Well, I think to better understand how application firewalls benefit, we first need to kind of understand the threat landscape. So you talk a little bit about, 0 day vulnerabilities and maybe, stopping them right at the day that they happen. What other types of threats that these types of firewalls can prevent? Like if you have an application, you stand one of these up, can it prevent, malware, let's say? Like what kind of threats can it prevent, and what's the landscape for this type of thing?
So that's a really good point, Lou. Is usually these CVEs, these vulnerabilities are usually a gateway to something else happening next. It's not it's not, oh, I got this Apache struts vulnerability and I hate to keep picking on them because the people at the Apache Software Foundation do amazing work. Apache runs the internet, so let me just be kind and throw them a bone there. But your application framework has a flaw. we're not just exploiting that flaw for the fun of exploiting that flaw. What usually happens next is if that flaw is maybe a remote code execution vulnerability, that's a great way to land something like a Bitcoin miner, right? We've seen a huge uptick in this over the last 6 to 12 months, where Bitcoin miners is a big thing that these attackers want to land. They don't necessarily want to steal your data. They want to steal your CPU cycles. And that's a really interesting change in things. And I got a couple notes on that I want to share in a moment. But what we got to look at is can this one flaw make it possible to exploit maybe other flaws and then exfiltrate data? Is it something where I can make money somehow? That's usually the end goal of most attackers, right? I want to make some money, whether it's stealing the data and reselling it, which we're finding there's so much personal data out there that personal data is actually becoming devalued, which is why we hypothesize, at least at F5 Labs, why we hypothesize that they're really shifted towards Bitcoin mining as the sort of the end goal when they attack your server. So they want to attack, they want to land something on your server. Maybe they want to find an injection flaw, which are still out there. So that's an injection flaw where they might inject some of their own code, like a cross-site scripting or a SQL injection. SQL injection is sort of the holy grail for an attacker. They are getting direct access to your database. And hopefully hopefully from an attacker point of view, they're hoping to dump things like username and password data. Cross-site scripting is a way to land drive-by download attacks. So you may have seen where they may infect a server, and then they use that as a way for anybody that then visits that website now automatically download some malware just through a visit, not because they even really clicked anything per se. So there's a lot of different angles they might take once they've gained the initial compromise. A lot of times they'll be chaining different vulnerabilities and exploits together to create whatever their end goal might be in terms of monetizing or creating some sort of value out of the exploit.
Right. Well, this day and age, we hear a lot about people using containers, people building applications for containers to scale their applications, and of course making them more secure. How does a WAF maybe apply here? How to supplement containers and their security vulnerabilities?
Well, the thing about containers is that it makes it really easy to stand things up and spin up applications very rapidly. It really contributes to that DevOps methodology of continuous integration, continuous delivery. However, the faster you stand things up, the more likely we may have introduced flaws into production. Again, WAF stands there as a compensating control to enable you to fight these things more quickly, fight the potential exploit of flaw more quickly. And so, most web application firewalls are function as a proxy for the application traffic itself. So it's a layer abstracted from the actual the container or wherever the application actually lives. So the infrastructure that's behind the web app firewall in terms of the application infrastructure, whether it's traditional virtualization or something more cutting edge like containers, it's still just as relevant because they're still all talking HTTP, hopefully over SSL or TLS more modernly.
Right. So of course, monitoring is important. So we talk about getting alerted, knowing when the threats are coming, what's the firewall blocking, what is it letting through. What kind of monitoring goes on here? Like, what kind of data can I actually get from these types of firewalls?
And so that's a great way to dip your toe into web application firewall. Actually, is to instead of necessarily putting your web app firewall into, say, blocking mode right away. Sometimes the visibility that a good web application firewall will bring is as valuable as what you get from being in blocking mode. And the reason I say that is that most folks, again, because a traditional network firewall or even IPS doesn't have the same level of visibility as a web application firewall to see the attempted exploits, you don't necessarily know that you're constantly under attack. Web application firewall, even in a sort of transparent non-blocking mode, can show you alerts to all the potential attempts, even if they weren't successful. It's good to know from a security practitioner's point of view. I want to know when someone's trying to exploit a flaw in my application, even if I don't even have that flaw in my application. I want to know this kind of information. That way I know where threat actors are coming from based on IP address or at a session level. And it helps me develop a better threat model over time and determine what my actual risk is, right? We talk about the OWASP top 10 risks for application flaws. However, without having some visibility, you can't really know if the OWASP top 10 actually matches your top 10. Your top 10 is based on what your actual threat surface looks like, based on the type of attacks you see, what your adversary looks like, as well as obviously what kind of flaws your web applications actually have. So the visibility you get, even if you don't go into blocking mode, is quite valuable.
Right. So let's talk common scenario. I think that you have an existing application, it's on your network, you want to secure it. Where does an IT pro, an op developer, an op team member actually get started? Where do they go? What do they do? What is required here?
So it's pretty straightforward for the most part. There's usually infrastructure somewhere in the application stack that will enable you to set up an application firewall. I'm personally, being from F5, I'm personally very biased towards the leverage your load balancer model or your application delivery controller. Your load balancer is usually doing SSL termination for you. It's distributing traffic to your web application servers. That's an ideal place to that system already has that app layer visibility. You just need to now layer on the security inspections that we were talking about, whether it's signature based or other types that we could talk about in a minute. There's one other way that's common is also cloud based. There's many cloud based WAF service. F5 offers one as well. I'm of the thought in terms of the general good of the internet, find one and get one, whether it's an appliance in your application stack or it's a cloud-based service. I would prefer you get it from F5, but get it from somewhere. This is really vital protection. This is how some big application attacks and breaches actually occurred, was not having a web application firewall in place. They only had the web app firewall in place in front of maybe one or two apps and not their entire application estate. So I really advocate strongly, get it in place now before the 0 day comes, before you have this panic mode. That way you have something there, even if you're not in blocking mode, as I said, you have the facility to go deploy a signature, deploy a countermeasure that will help you stop that attack before it starts. And be able to respond quickly, which is important. So there's cloud-based models, managed service models, self-service models, as well as on-prem, traditional appliance-based modes. So a lot of different ways you can handle that. And I see they're scrolling the recent webinar on advanced WAF that I was fortunate enough to moderate for F5. So you can definitely download that and register, and then you can download and watch more video of me, but not my face, just slides. Just my lovely voice.
Fantastic. Well, we're running a little bit low on time, but I want to bring my co-host back in because they're chomping at the bit here. They have some questions. I think, Kirsch, you had a question on some design questions, right?
Yeah, I want to start with that because, we've been talking about all of the issues around web programming and the WAF sitting in front of that. One of my questions is, we've got a lot of, in addition to traditional web application programming, we've got people dealing with adaptive design. We've got people using responsive design principles. What do those different design principles and the programming that supports them with web pages that are going to run on a variety of different devices do for the deployment of a WAF?
So that's an excellent question, Kurt. More modern web applications, as they become more sort of browser resident, richer web applications, single page applications is another area, and then mobile apps. I'll touch on these separately, but first start with what they share in common. They both treat the web application endpoint, sort of the server side of things, as an API for the most part. It's not rich content for the most part being delivered down from the web application server. That's sort of delivered down once, and then there's a lot of polling in the background. So you want to find a web app firewall that has good API facilities, right? The ability to validate JSON payloads, JOT tokens, a lot of the things that you associate with API security. If you're deploying a web app firewall in these type of more modern web applications, you should really think about having a web app firewall that is specifically instrumented to handle APIs. Now, where mobile apps and more single page apps and browser-based apps differentiate themselves is that quite obviously the lack of a browser. So a mobile app is not a browser at the endpoint, and that really takes away a lot of our facility to detect certain types of advanced threats. So the way that attackers are mounting DOS attacks against the application, the way they are finding the flaws that they later exploit is through a lot of automation. And when we have a browser at the endpoint, it's actually we have a lot of different facilities on a more advanced web app firewall to detect automation, detect bots. And so when we have that browser there, we can fingerprint it. If you go to the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Panopticlick project, you can see how browsers are fingerprinted through JavaScript injections. An advanced web app firewall can inject JavaScripts to fingerprint the browser, interrogate the browser, determine a human user being there, determine if it's just a headless browser being automated. So there's a lot of things that you should look for in terms of advanced capabilities on your web app firewall. Now, when we get to a mobile app, that actually is very different because we don't have the browser there to interrogate with JavaScript. Most mobile apps actually don't process JavaScript at all. And for that, we actually have at least at F5 we have an SDK. I don't mean to plug product here, but you do need to look at a way to enrich your mobile application in order to be able to tell that this is a legitimate mobile application and not just some bot that's that's scraping across my APIs because they know we don't have as robust protections there potentially against automation. And so when you think about things like clicking the button that says "I'm not a robot," you can't do that on a mobile app's API endpoint. They don't have the same type of facilities to detect automation. So really look for something where there's a client-side integration. Maybe your mobile app developer that you're contracting with can bring that technology into play to help you validate that I have a legitimate mobile app here and not just something that's scraping across my APIs. And again, that's something F5 we have a few videos up on how to make that really easy. So if you're interested in at least how that works, even if you're not interested in F5 technology, you can definitely check out some of the how-to videos that we've put out there on how that kind of works.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and I want to quickly slide to another point on the stack real quickly before turning it over to Padre for his questions. You mentioned SSL and TLS. We know we've got a major update on TLS thundering down the pike, and 1.3 breaks, let's call it everything. How big a deal is that going to be for WAF? Are you ready for that, or is that going to cause folks all over the internet to stumble?
So the beauty about a web application firewall is that if it's deployed or architected properly, and this is a question you should ask any web app firewall vendor, cloud-based or appliance-based, and this is something that's native for F5, fortunately, is that it should be proxy-based. If your web app firewall isn't a native proxy, then it's going to struggle with modern TLS 1.3. TLS 1.3, the trick here is that it's all perfect forward secrecy or forward secrecy, depending on how much confidence you place in DHE or Diffie-Hellman ciphers, where we're generating keys per session. That means you have to basically proxy every single SSL connection so that you can decrypt the per session key that's generated. So if you're a proxy, that shouldn't be a problem. It should be pretty straightforward, and you should actually be TLS 1.3 tolerant. Even if you don't support TLS 1.3 right away, you should be able to negotiate down the TLS 1.2 in the initial connection setup. So this really shouldn't be a problem if you have a proper proxy. Where this gets really tricky, the TLS 1.3 thing, to depart from the WAF topic for a moment, is when you're filtering traffic on the outbound. So if I'm say a big college or university and I want to filter all my students' traffic going out, or if I'm a big enterprise that wants to filter all my employees' traffic going out to the internet, going to Facebook.com, going to places where they may potentially run into malware or be leaking corporate data intentionally or unintentionally, that is a bigger problem because decrypting that traffic, I don't own the keys, and therefore you got to be. You need a few more tricks to make that work. But for a web app firewall where we're a reverse proxy and not a forward proxy, it should be pretty straightforward to terminate that traffic on a per session basis.
Brian, I have a question really quickly just about the Web Application Firewall and how it deals with applications that need to speak to one another. I think when we're talking about firewalls, a lot of people will fall back into the old perimeter mentality, which that's not really what WAFs do. WAFs can look at all traffic. They can make not decisions, but they can give you actionable information about the type of communications that are happening between application and the clients that it's serving. But what specific tweaks do you need to make to a WAF when applications need to speak with one another?
That's a great question, Padre. Again, and this actually boils back to the same answer I gave to Kurt about modern web apps and mobile apps, is that web apps talk to each other like APIs. And you have to, what I would do there is really look at using authentication to shore up those connections, right? So wherever we can authenticate connections, that's really important to make sure that you can actually establish some level of security and some level of trust. So machines talking to machines, web apps talking to web apps. Again, that's API communications. Make sure your web app firewall has good API security functions, whether it's XML schema validation, JSON package validation, JOT token validation, things of that nature. Make sure it handles identity well. Make sure it handles authentication well. Whether it's that the authentication function may not be handled by your WAF, but it may make sure your endpoints have good authentication set up, and that'll help you immensely in terms of securing web app to web app or machine to machine traffic.
Well, thank you, Brian. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and you've done it again. You've wasted another hour of the best dang enterprise tech show, according to 9 out of 10 application firewalls. Of course, I want to thank you, Brian, for jumping on This Week in Enterprise Tech again. You're a great guest. We love having you on. I appreciate you coming by again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lou. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Padre. This is always a fun hour for me, and I look forward to coming back again soon if you'll have me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you tell the folks at home where they can find you and a little bit about F5?
So I would encourage you to head over to f5labs.com. That'll redirect you to f5.com/labs. All well and good. That's where vendor agnostic free application threat intelligence is available. This is our internal PD team that develops all our attack signatures, where they publish research, where our researchers around web fraud and malware post research. We've got reports about SSL and TLS on there, the Decade of Data Breaches report, which I mentioned. This is all free. If you subscribe, we'll only send you 2 emails a week, or actually 1 email a week with two new reports. And it's all free. You don't have to register. You don't have to surrender your personal information. It's really, really good information, stuff that we're really proud of. And we're just sharing our incident response team, sharing our SOCs and our Silverline team. Everybody inside F5 that touches security and does a little bit of research has an opportunity to publish here. And it's just a lot of great free information to help you develop better application threat models. If you're actually interested in what I have to say, I can be found on Twitter at B.A. McHenry. So that's me there and my love of Legos. And I think I need to start 3D printing Legos to really get into it further. My son and I just started getting into 3D printing, so it's really, really cool. And
yeah, I like it.
I also if you want to find me and my team have been working really hard on our Dev Central community site and publishing a lot of new how-to videos. We just published a series called AppSec Made Easy, which goes over a lot of these more advanced web application firewall features. They're like 5 or 10 minute videos that just kind of walk you through how we do things. And if you happen to have F5 technology at your fingertips, it'll walk you through how to configure some of these more advanced features. So, that's it for me. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I have to thank my co-host in crime, starting with Mr. Robert Ballister. Padre, can you tell the folks at home where they can find you and all of your stuff and your adventures?
Of course, the best place to find me is always going to be on Twitter, twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you follow me there, you'll find out what I'll be doing here on Twit. I think it's 2 more live episodes, 2 more pre-recorded episodes. But you'll also find what I'm going to be doing post-Twit. I'm still going to be creating content. I'll be in Portland for the summer before I move to Rome in September. So go ahead and jump by, and I'll try to give you some fun stuff.
Fantastic. Well, of course, we can't do this show without Mr. Curtis Franklin, because all the great information and things he brings to the table here. Yeah, Curtis, can you tell the folks at home where they can find you and all your stuff?
Well, if you're looking for my writing, you can always find that over at darkreading.com. I usually will tweet out about what I've been writing and what I'm doing aside from writing on my Twitter feed. That's at KG4GWA. If you're going to be at Cisco Live this week, look for me there. Feel free to say hello. On Sunday, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be at the Talos Security Summit for Cisco. Lots of good stuff. Also going to be running tomorrow. I'm doing the Community Rainbow Run for the One Pulse Foundation here in Orlando. So if you're running that, run over to the slow guy running towards the back of the pack and say hello.
Fantastic. Thanks, Curtis. Well, of course, I got to thank everyone that makes the show possible, especially the Leo and Lisa that let us do This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week. They support us. Thank you so much for that. Of course, thank you to all the engineers that makes the show possible. Of course, thank you to Brian Chibert. Chibert, we call him. He's our Talos producer. Of course, he gets the shows up and running. He basically gets all the guests and brings them in. So if you want to give him some show content or whatever and give them some show notes, head over to Twitter at ADVNET Lab. Of course, he's always interested in some new guests. Of course, I also want to thank you. You tune in each and every week. You're our loyal listeners. We want to make it easier for you to listen to and watch This Week in Enterprise Tech. So go over right now to twit.tv/Twyet. Find all of our back episodes, the full show notes, the guest information, links to the stories in the show, and more importantly, next to the videos there's that magic button. You subscribe to any format of your choice, whether it's audio, video, HD video, to the device of your choice, phone, tablet, laptop, and desktop. And of course, after you subscribe, always remember we do this show live each and every week, 1:30 p.m. Pacific, live at live.twit.tv. And if you're joining live, you might as well join the chat room live as well, and that's irc.twit.tv. And I don't know about you, but I think the chat room adds a lot of value to the show. We got a bunch of questions from them today, so feel free to jump in there and work with the Twyet Riot there. Also, don't forget to follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. There you'll find all the cool things I'm working on. Of course, my daily work on my day job is you can find all that stuff at dev.office.com. Some exciting stuff coming our way from there, so check it out. Of course, make sure you get some more productivity by extending Office. And of course, before we sign out, we definitely want to thank our TD for today. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell the folks at home where they can find you on the interwebs?
You can't find me on the interwebs. But I am in the dark, as Padre
You're a
was pointing
ghost.
out. I am in the dark web. Just kidding. But I'm drinking a caramel frappuccino that I just got magically handed to right now. So that's what I do.
Fantastic. Well, Kevin, we can't do without you for the man behind the curtain. So thank you for being here and thank you for helping us out.
Sweet.
Well, folks, until next time, I'm Louis Maresca saying, if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep Twyet.